At just 35 years old, Traoré had already defied every expectation placed upon him. The young military leader, who had risen to power through a bloodless coup, was about to do something that would send shockwaves through diplomatic circles from Tehran to Tel Aviv, from Washington to Beijing. He was about to deliver a message that no one saw coming. Not from a landlocked West African nation, not from a leader barely 2 years in power, and certainly not with the moral authority he was about to claim. The camera crew from Al Jazeera had been waiting for 20 minutes, adjusting lighting and checking sound levels. They thought they were there for a routine interview about regional security and economic development. They had no idea they were about to witness a moment that would be replayed on news channels across 6 continents. "Are we ready?" Traoré asked in French, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of determination that made the veteran correspondent sit up straighter. "Yes, Mr. President," came the reply. What happened next would be dissected by foreign policy experts for months to come. But in that moment, as the red recording light flickered on, Ibrahim Traoré looked directly into the camera and began to speak, not just to his own people, but to 2 nations locked in a deadly embrace of mutual destruction. "Brothers and sisters in Iran, brothers and sisters in Israel," Traoré began, his words measured and deliberate. "I speak to you today not as a president seeking political gain, not as a military leader flexing power, but as a son of Africa who has seen too much blood spilled in the name of pride." The interviewer's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the prepared talking points they had discussed. This was something else entirely. For too long, the world has watched as your conflict consumes not just your own peoples, but spreads its poison across the globe. Children in Gaza grow up knowing only the sound of sirens. Families in Tel Aviv live with the constant fear of rocket attacks. Young men in Tehran are taught to hate people they have never met. And what do we, the so-called international community, do? We pick sides. We send weapons. We make speeches. We perpetuate the cycle. Traoré paused, his hands clasped in front of him. Behind him, the flag of Burkina Faso, with its bold red, white, and green stripes crowned by a golden star, seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the window. But I did not come to power to be silent when silence equals complicity. I did not survive the streets of Ouagadougou, witness the struggles of my people, and take responsibility for this nation's future to watch the world burn while African wisdom is ignored. The camera operator later said he had goosebumps. The correspondent, a seasoned journalist who had covered conflicts from Syria to Sudan, found herself leaning forward, captivated by the unexpected gravity of the moment. "Let me tell you what I have learned from the red earth of Burkina Faso," Traoré continued, his voice growing stronger. "I have learned that when 2 neighbors fight over a piece of land, both will eventually starve. I have learned that hatred passed from father to son becomes heavier with each generation until it crushes the very people it was meant to protect. I have learned that the strongest warrior is not the one who wins every battle, but the one who knows when to stop fighting." He stood up from behind his desk, the camera following his movement as he walked to a large map of Africa hanging on the wall. "Look at this continent," he said, gesturing to the map. "We have 54 countries, hundreds of ethnic groups, thousands of languages, multiple religions. We have every reason to tear each other apart. The colonial powers left us borders that made no sense, resources distributed unfairly, and artificial divisions designed to keep us weak. And yes, we have fought. We have spilled blood. We have made terrible mistakes." Traoré turned back to the camera, his eyes intense. "But we have also learned. We have learned that the Hutu and the Tutsi are both Rwandan. We have learned that the Yoruba and the Igbo are both Nigerian. We have learned that the Akan and the Yu are both Ghanaian. We have learned that our diversity is our strength, not our weakness." "To my brothers and sisters in Iran," Traoré said, his tone shifting to something more personal, "I know your history. I know your pride. I know the legacy of Cyrus the Great, who freed the Jewish people from Babylonian captivity. I know the poetry of Rumi, who spoke of love transcending all boundaries. I know the courage of your people, who have resisted foreign domination for thousands of years." The Al Jazeera team exchanged glances. Where was this going? "But I also know that your current path leads nowhere but to destruction. When you speak of wiping Israel from the map, you dishonor the memory of Cyrus. When you fund proxy wars across the region, you betray the wisdom of Rumi. When you let your young people's dreams be consumed by endless conflict, you waste the courage your ancestors died to preserve. Traoré's voice carried no judgment, only sadness. In Burkina Faso, we have a saying, "The tree that would grow tall must sink its roots deep, not spread its branches thin." Iran, you are spreading your branches thin across a region in flames while your roots, your people, your culture, your true strength, wither from neglect. And to my brothers and sisters in Israel, Traoré continued, turning his attention to the other half of his impossible audience, I know your story too. I know the depths of persecution your people have endured. I know the miracle of your return to your ancestral homeland. I know the innovation, the determination, the refusal to disappear that has marked your history. His voice grew softer, but more intense. But I also know that you have become what you once fled from. When your government builds walls that separate families, you echo the ghettos your grandparents escaped. When you collectively punish entire populations for the crimes of a few, you use the logic of those who once collectively punished you. When you teach your children that security comes only through the subjugation of others, you pass on the very trauma you sought to heal. The silence in the room was deafening. This wasn't diplomatic language. This wasn't careful political speech. This was something far more dangerous and far more powerful. It was truth, spoken without regard for consequences. Now let me tell you what Africa proposes, Traoré said, returning to his desk but remaining standing. Not the Africa of your imagination, poor, chaotic, dependent. The real Africa. The Africa that has learned to transform conflict into cooperation, that has learned to build bridges across impossible divides. He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. 6 months ago, I began reaching out, quietly, carefully, to leaders across this continent. Not for publicity, not for political gain, but because I believe we have something the world needs: experience in reconciliation. We have solutions that have never been tried in your conflict, because no one has thought to ask us. The correspondent later admitted this was the moment she realized she was witnessing something historic. I have letters here from President Kagame of Rwanda, who transformed his nation from the site of genocide to a model of reconciliation. I have commitments from President Ramaphosa of South Africa, whose people showed the world how to dismantle apartheid without descending into race war. I have pledges from President Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire, who reunited his country after civil war. I have promises from leaders across this continent who have learned that peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. Traoré opened the folder and began reading from official letterhead. Today, on behalf of the African Union, I am extending an unprecedented invitation. We invite the leadership of Iran and Israel to come to Africa. Not to negotiate, the time for negotiation has passed. Not to debate, you have debated for 75 years. But to learn. The camera zoomed in on his face as he continued. We invite you to Kigali, to see how a country moves beyond genocide. We invite you to Cape Town, to understand how a nation dismantles institutionalized oppression. We invite you to Abidjan, to witness how former enemies become partners. We invite you to Ouagadougou, to discover how young people can be agents of change rather than instruments of war. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But this invitation comes with conditions. You cannot come as heads of state on official visits with motorcades and photo opportunities. You must come as students. You must come willing to listen more than you speak. You must come prepared to confront uncomfortable truths about yourselves and your nations. And you must come together. I am 35 years old, Traoré said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. I was not born into privilege. I did not inherit power. I took responsibility for my country because someone had to, and because I believed we could do better. In 2 years, we have reduced terrorism by 60%. We have increased school enrollment by 40%. We have begun building the industries that will employ our young people for generations to come. He gestured toward the window, where the sounds of the city continued. But every night, I go to bed knowing that somewhere in this world, a child is dying because grown men are too proud to admit they are wrong. Every morning, I wake up knowing that the resources being spent on weapons of war could instead build schools, hospitals, farms, factories. Every day, I watch potential solutions ignored because they don't come from the right places or the important countries. His frustration was becoming visible now, his diplomatic composure cracking slightly. Do you know what we could accomplish if we diverted just 10% of global military spending to African development? We could end hunger on this continent within 5 years. We could provide clean water to every village. We could connect every community to the internet. We could educate every child. Instead, we watch superpowers play chess with human lives while real solutions are dismissed because they come from Africa. But this message is not just for Iran and Israel, Traoré continued, his scope expanding. This is for every nation that profits from conflict. This is for every arms dealer who gets rich from war. This is for every politician who gains power by stoking fear and hatred. This is for everyone who has given up on the possibility of peace. He walked closer to the camera, his presence filling the frame. Africa is rising. Not the Africa of your stereotypes, but the real Africa. The Africa of innovation, of wisdom, of resilience. We are the youngest continent, the fastest growing economies, the most diverse cultures. We are the future, and the future refuses to accept that conflict is inevitable. The passion in his voice was building, and even the seasoned camera crew found themselves drawn into his words. For too long, the world has looked to America, to Europe, to Asia for leadership. But where has that leadership gotten us? More sophisticated weapons? More efficient ways to kill? More elaborate excuses for inaction? The time has come for new voices, new approaches, new solutions. I speak especially to the young people watching this, Traoré said, his tone shifting again. To the 18-year-old in Tehran who dreams of studying engineering, but is instead being taught to hate. To the 20-year-old in Tel Aviv who wants to start a business, but lives in fear of the next attack. To the 16-year-old in Gaza who deserves a future beyond the cycle of violence. To the 19-year-old in Jerusalem who should be building bridges, not walls. He paused, his eyes seeming to look beyond the camera to reach these invisible audience members. Your leaders have failed you. My generation has failed you. We have handed you a world where young people's energy is wasted on ancient hatreds instead of future possibilities. But you have power. You have the power to refuse participation in this madness. You have the power to demand better from your leaders. You have the power to connect across borders, to learn from each other, to build something new. Let me speak now to those who only understand the language of money, Traoré said, his tone becoming more businesslike. Do you know the economic cost of the Israel-Palestine conflict alone? Economists estimate it at over $12 trillion since 1948. $12 trillion. Do you understand what that could have built? What that could have created? What problems that could have solved? He pulled out a tablet and began reading statistics. Iran spends 3.8% of its GDP on military expenditure. Israel spends 5.6%. Both countries together spend over $50 billion annually on defense. Meanwhile, the entire African Union's budget for infrastructure development is less than $10 billion per year. You are spending more on finding new ways to destroy each other than an entire continent spends on building its future. The numbers were stark and undeniable. In Burkina Faso, we have learned to do more with less. We have learned that investment in education yields higher returns than investment in weapons. We have learned that building hospitals creates more security than building military bases. We have learned that feeding children is more strategic than funding militias. I want to be clear about something, Traoré said, returning to his desk and picking up a thick document. This is not just Ibrahim Traoré speaking. This is the voice of a continent that has been silent too long. Over the past 6 months, I have spoken with 47 African heads of state. 47. From Morocco to South Africa, from Senegal to Somalia. And we are united in this message. He held up the document. This is the Ouagadougou Declaration on Middle East Peace. It has been signed by leaders representing over 1.3 billion African people. We are not picking sides in your conflict. We are refusing to participate in your conflict. We are offering an alternative to your conflict. The weight of what he was saying began to sink in for everyone in the room. Africa officially declares its neutrality in the Iran-Israel conflict, but we also declare our commitment to peace. We will no longer provide diplomatic cover for either side's actions. We will no longer allow our votes in international bodies to be taken for granted. We will no longer remain silent while the world burns. But this is not just about politics or economics, Traoré continued, his voice taking on a different quality. This is about the soul of humanity. In my Islamic faith, I am taught that killing one innocent person is like killing all of humanity. In Christianity, I am taught to love my enemies. In traditional African spirituality, I am taught that we are all connected, that harming others harms ourselves. He paused, his hands clasped in front of him. Every major religion teaches peace, yet every major conflict claims religious justification. This is not a failure of faith, this is a failure of leadership. Religious leaders who bless weapons instead of working for peace. Political leaders who use sacred texts to justify secular ambitions. Military leaders who invoke God while planning destruction. His voice grew stronger. The youth of the world are walking away from religion because they see it associated with violence instead of love, with hatred instead of compassion, with division instead of unity. If we do not change course, we will lose not just our political legitimacy, but our spiritual authority. While Iran and Israel spend billions developing new ways to kill each other, do you know what Africa is doing? Traoré asked, his tone shifting to excitement. We are leapfrogging your old technologies. We are building solar farms that power entire regions. We are creating mobile banking systems that connect rural villages to global markets. We are developing drought-resistant crops that could feed the world. He gestured toward his tablet. In Rwanda, they are using drones to deliver medical supplies to remote areas. In Kenya, they are developing AI systems to predict and prevent crop failures. In Nigeria, they are creating blockchain solutions for transparent elections. In Ghana, they are building satellite systems to provide internet access to every school. His enthusiasm was infectious. This is what happens when young minds are focused on creation instead of destruction, when resources go to building instead of bombing, when energy is channeled into innovation instead of warfare. The choice is simple: join the future or remain trapped in the past. And to the journalists covering this story, Traoré said, looking directly into the camera, you have a choice to make. You can treat this as another diplomatic curiosity, another feel-good story from Africa that gets forgotten by next week. Or you can recognize that you are witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in global leadership. The Al Jazeera correspondent felt personally called out. For too long, African voices have been marginalized in international media. We are covered when there is conflict, famine, or disease. But when we offer solutions, when we demonstrate progress, when we show leadership, suddenly we are not newsworthy. This ends now. His voice carried a challenge. I am not asking for your charity or your sympathy. I am demanding your attention and your respect. Africa has earned a seat at the table of global decision-making, and we will no longer accept being ignored. The solutions to many of the world's problems already exist on this continent. The question is whether the world is humble enough to learn from us. History will remember this moment, Traoré said, his voice taking on a prophetic quality. Just as history remembers when Gandhi showed the world that nonviolent resistance could defeat empire. Just as history remembers when Mandela showed the world that reconciliation could overcome apartheid. Just as history remembers when King showed the world that love could triumph over hatred. He stood again, his presence commanding the room. Today, Africa shows the world that wisdom can emerge from unexpected places, that leadership can come from unlikely sources, that solutions can be found where no one thought to look. We are not claiming to be perfect. We are not claiming to have all the answers. But we are claiming our right to be heard. To the leaders of Iran and Israel, I set a deadline, Traoré announced, his voice becoming formal and official. You have 100 days from today to respond to our invitation. 100 days to show the world that you are leaders, not just politicians. 100 days to prove that you care more about your people's future than your own pride. He looked at his watch with theatrical precision. At the end of 100 days, if you have not accepted our invitation, Africa will take further action. We will withdraw our ambassadors from both countries. We will suspend all trade agreements. We will use our collective voice in international bodies to support concrete measures for peace, including sanctions against both governments until they agree to meaningful dialogue. The stakes had suddenly become very real. This may seem like an empty threat from a continent you do not take seriously. Let me remind you, Africa has 54 votes in the United Nations. We have trillion-dollar markets you depend on. We have resources you need. We have moral authority you lack. And we have 1.3 billion people who are tired of watching the world commit suicide while we have the medicine for its cure. To my fellow Africans watching this, Traoré said, his tone becoming warmer and more personal, I make you this promise. We will not be passive observers of history any longer. We will not wait for permission to lead. We will not apologize for our solutions. We will not accept that wisdom only comes from the West or technology only comes from the East. His pride in his continent was evident. For 500 years, we have watched others write the rules of international relations while our voices were ignored. For 100 years, we have seen our resources extracted while we remained poor. For 50 years, we have watched conflicts around the world while our methods of reconciliation were dismissed. This changes today. He pointed toward the map of Africa behind him. Every child born on this continent will grow up knowing that their people stood up for peace when it mattered most. Every young person will understand that they come from a continent of solutions, not problems. Every leader will know that they represent not just their own country, but a new model of global citizenship. But this movement extends beyond Africa, Traoré continued. I have received messages of support from leaders across the global south. From Brazil to Bangladesh, from Mexico to Malaysia, from Indonesia to Argentina. The majority of humanity is tired of being told that peace is impossible by the minority that profits from war. He pulled out his phone and began reading messages. President Lula writes, Brazil stands with Africa in demanding that the powerful choose peace over pride. President Hasina writes, Bangladesh survived genocide and civil war to become a developing success story. Peace is always possible. President López Obrador writes, Mexico's revolution taught us that enemies can become partners when they focus on their people's welfare instead of their own power. The global nature of the support was becoming clear. This is not Africa against the world. This is the world's majority standing up to the world's most destructive minority. This is the global South teaching the global North that there are better ways to resolve conflict. This is the future refusing to be held hostage by the past. Let me be honest about what this means for me personally, Traoré said, his voice becoming quieter and more reflective. I know that by speaking these words, I am making enemies of powerful people. I know that my country may face pressure, sanctions, even threats. I know that some will try to paint me as naive, arrogant, or dangerous. He looked directly into the camera. But I also know that my children will grow up in the world we create today. I know that staying silent makes me complicit in the suffering I have the power to address. I know that leadership means taking risks for the greater good, not playing it safe for personal benefit. His voice grew stronger again. If they kill me for speaking truth to power, I will die knowing that I used my position to serve humanity, not myself. If they destroy my country for refusing to be silent, we will be destroyed with dignity rather than survive with shame. If they dismiss us as irrelevant, history will judge who was truly relevant when it mattered most. Now let me get specific about what we are proposing, Traoré said, returning to his seat and opening a detailed document. The African Peace Initiative consists of 5 concrete phases, each building on lessons learned from successful conflict resolution across this continent. He began reading from the document. Phase 1. Immediate cessation of all military aid and weapons sales to both Iran and Israel by African nations and our international partners. War cannot continue without weapons, and weapons cannot flow without international cooperation. Phase 2. Establishment of African peace monitoring teams in both countries, drawn from veterans of successful peace processes in Rwanda, South Africa, Mozambique, and Sierra Leone. These teams will document violations and recommend responses. Phase 3. Economic incentives for peace. Every month without military escalation will result in increased trade agreements, investment opportunities, and development aid from African nations and our partners. Phase 4. Youth exchange programs between Iran, Israel, and African nations. Young people will learn conflict resolution techniques, economic development strategies, and governance models that have worked in post-conflict societies. Phase 5. Long-term partnership agreements that make both nations stakeholders in African development while making Africa a stakeholder in Middle Eastern peace. These are not theoretical proposals, Traoré emphasized. These are proven methods. Let me tell you about Mozambique, where former enemies now govern together after a 16-year civil war. Let me tell you about Sierra Leone, where child soldiers became community leaders after an 11-year conflict. Let me tell you about Liberia, where women led a peace movement that ended 14 years of civil war. His voice was filled with conviction. In each case, the experts said peace was impossible. The ethnic divisions were too deep, they said. The religious differences were too fundamental, they said. The economic interests were too entrenched, they said. The international community was too invested in the status quo, they said. And in each case, African solutions succeeded where international interventions had failed. He stood up again, his energy building. Do you know why? Because we understand that peace is not just about stopping the shooting. Peace is about addressing the root causes of conflict. Peace is about creating economic opportunities for young people. Peace is about healing historical traumas. Peace is about building institutions that serve all people, not just the powerful. The young people of Iran and Israel are already connecting, Traoré revealed. Through social media, through gaming, through music, through sports. They are learning each other's languages, sharing each other's cultures, questioning their leaders' assumptions. The revolution has already begun. We are just giving it official recognition and support. He pulled out his phone and began showing social media posts. Look at this, Iranian students learning Hebrew through Israeli online tutors. Israeli teenagers listening to Persian rap music. Palestinian and Jewish kids playing the same video games, rooting for the same football teams, following the same influencers. The borders their leaders have drawn in the sand cannot contain the connections their hearts have already made. His excitement was palpable. This is the generation that will make peace, not because their leaders command it, but because war makes no sense to them. They have grown up connected to the world, exposed to different perspectives, aware that there are better ways to live. Our job is to support them, not constrain them. And let me speak directly to the women of Iran and Israel, Traoré continued. You have borne the cost of this conflict in ways that are never counted in casualty statistics. You have raised children who were taken from you by war. You have buried husbands, brothers, sons. You have lived with fear, sacrificed dreams, accepted limitations that were never yours to accept. His voice became gentle but firm. In Africa, we have learned that women are not just victims of conflict. They are the architects of peace. In Liberia, it was women who ended the war. In Rwanda, it was women who led the reconciliation. In Sierra Leone, it was women who demanded truth over revenge. Your voices, your perspectives, your solutions are needed now more than ever. He gestured toward the camera. Form your own networks. Speak your own truths. Demand your own seats at negotiating tables. The men who created this mess have proven they cannot solve it. Perhaps it is time for the women who have paid the highest price to chart a different course. To the religious leaders of all faiths, Traoré said, his tone becoming more solemn, you have a choice to make. Will you continue to provide religious justification for political violence? Or will you remember why people first sought God? Will you bless weapons or bind wounds? Will you preach hatred or practice love? Will you serve power or serve peace? He paused, allowing his words to resonate. The youth are leaving our mosques, churches, and synagogues because they see religion associated with division rather than unity, with judgment rather than compassion, with war rather than peace. If we do not change course, we will preside over empty buildings filled only with the echoes of our own hypocrisy. His challenge was direct and personal. I call on every imam, every rabbi, every priest, every pastor, every spiritual leader to spend the next 100 days preaching reconciliation instead of resistance, teaching love instead of hatred, building bridges instead of walls. Let your sermons focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. Let your prayers ask for peace rather than victory. Let your influence serve healing rather than hurting. To the business leaders profiting from this conflict, Traoré said, his tone hardening, your short-term gains are creating long-term losses for everyone, including yourselves. Every bomb sold is a school not built, a hospital not funded, a factory not opened. Every weapon manufactured is resources diverted from innovation, creativity, progress. He pulled out an economic report. The global arms trade is worth $100 billion annually. Global spending on education is $1.2 trillion, but most of that is concentrated in wealthy countries. If we redirected just 10% of arms spending to education in developing countries, we could educate 50 million more children every year. Those children would grow up to be inventors, entrepreneurs, leaders, peacemakers. Which investment has a better return? His argument was both moral and practical. I am not asking you to be charitable. I am asking you to be smart. The markets of the future will be built by countries that invest in their people, not their militaries. The innovations of tomorrow will come from societies that celebrate diversity rather than fear it. The profits of the next century will flow to those who solve problems rather than create them. And to the international community that claims to want peace while selling weapons to both sides, Traoré said, his voice rising with indignation, your hypocrisy is showing. You cannot simultaneously call for ceasefire and provide the bullets. You cannot demand peace while profiting from war. You cannot claim moral authority while enabling moral bankruptcy. His frustration was evident and justified. The United Nations has passed thousands of resolutions calling for peace in the Middle East. Thousands. How many weapons have been sold since those resolutions were passed? How much money has been made from the suffering those resolutions claim to address? How many diplomats have built careers managing conflict rather than resolving it? He stood up and walked toward the camera. Africa is calling out this hypocrisy. We are naming it, shaming it, and ending our participation in it. We will no longer provide diplomatic cover for your contradictions. We will no longer remain silent while you turn human suffering into profit margins. We will no longer accept that maintaining the status quo is more important than saving lives. But let me end with hope, Traoré said, his voice softening and becoming more optimistic. Because despite everything I have said about the failures of leadership, the persistence of conflict, the profits of war, I still believe in the power of human beings to choose differently. I still believe that people want peace more than their leaders want power. I still believe that love is stronger than hate, that hope is more powerful than fear, that the future can be better than the past. He returned to his desk and picked up a photograph. This is a picture of my daughter. She is 3 years old. She speaks 3 languages, French, Arabic, and more, our local language. She plays with children from 6 different countries whose families work in Burkina Faso. She has never known war, never experienced ethnic hatred, never been taught that her religion makes her superior to others. His voice was filled with paternal love and hope. This is the world we can create for all children. This is the future we can choose. This is the legacy we can leave. But only if we have the courage to change course, the wisdom to learn from each other, and the humility to admit when we are wrong. So I make this final call, Traoré said, standing once more and looking directly into the camera with an intensity that seemed to reach through the screen. To every person watching this, regardless of nationality, religion, ethnicity, or political belief, you have the power to choose peace. You have the ability to demand better from your leaders. You have the voice to speak truth to power. You have the influence to change the conversation. His voice was building to a crescendo. Do not let them tell you that conflict is inevitable. Do not let them convince you that some people are born enemies. Do not let them make you believe that the way things are is the way things must always be. History is written by those who refuse to accept unacceptable situations. Change comes from those who say enough when everyone else says impossible. He moved closer to the camera again. Share this message. Translate it into every language. Send it to every leader. Post it on every platform. Make it impossible to ignore. Make it uncomfortable to dismiss. Make it undeniable that the world wants peace and will no longer accept excuses for war. I, Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, speaking on behalf of the African Union and supported by leaders across the global south, make this promise to the world, he said, his voice taking on the weight of formal commitment. We will not give up. We will not be discouraged by setbacks. We will not be intimidated by threats. We will not be bought with bribes. We will not be silenced by critics. His determination was absolute. 100 days from today, we will reconvene to assess the response to our invitation. If Iran and Israel choose peace, we will celebrate with them and support them every step of the way. If they choose continued conflict, We will implement every measure at our disposal to pressure them toward sanity." He paused for emphasis. "But regardless of their choice, Africa will continue rising. The global South will continue finding solutions. Young people will continue connecting across borders. Women will continue demanding peace. Religious leaders will continue preaching love. Business leaders will continue investing in the future rather than the past. The movement for peace will continue growing until it becomes impossible to ignore and unstoppable in its momentum." The ripple effects of that one afternoon in Ouagadougou would continue spreading for generations. Children who grew up watching the broadcast would become diplomats, peace builders, and leaders who carried forward the lesson that wisdom could emerge from anywhere, that leadership could come from anyone, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to imagine it differently. And in the modest presidential office in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré returned to his desk to continue the daily work of governing his country, secure in the knowledge that sometimes one voice